My name's Katie Shaw and this is my colleague Vicky Collins, and we run the pre-sessional English language programme at Royal Holloway University just outside London. And this is the title, the rather dramatic title of our presentation, and our image drawn by one of our colleagues. This is what it felt like. We had our crisis year in 2013, and our crisis was that a few weeks before the programme began, we discovered that we had increased our student numbers by 100 on what we'd expected. So we'd expected 240 and we found out that we were going to get about 360. And the programme structure that we had in place wasn't really suitable for those numbers. And this is what it felt like. We were running around frantically, trying to stop the ship from sinking, patching up holes. Thankfully, we managed to sort of get it into shore without sinking, but we didn't want to go through that experience again. So between 2013 and 2014, we did a big project to rewrite the programme and restructure it. So the aim of our programme today is really to tell you about that rewriting project. We'll talk through, we started by really paring it all back, looking at the underlying aims and objectives of the programme. Then we made decisions about the content and assessment. And then we looked at some of the practicalities of how to actually structure and organise the programme. Just to give you a little bit of background about our context, we run a 12-week, an 8-week and a 4-week programme, which I know varies a lot from university to university. About 75% of our students are postgraduates, and the majority of them are progressing on to School of Management or Economics programmes in our particular institution. So as we're speaking, you may want to think about your own programmes and what you can do to them to sort of help them to face any of the storms that may come your way.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about our development of the programme aims and outcomes. So before we started thinking about selecting materials, whether we would go down the textbook route or bespoke materials or assessments or modes of delivery, we wanted to make sure that the programme had very strong foundations to prevent the ship from sinking. So on this slide, I've got some of the input, some of the things that we were considering in developing our aims, revising the curriculum. And the first aim was to ensure that by the end of the programme, the students would reach B2 level in each language subskill. On our pre-sessional, we have quite a few students that come with B1 level in one or two subskills. I think that echoes around the room there. We also had input from the visiting examiner report, which pointed out that our assessment of learners' listening and reading skills could be more explicit. So that's something we revised for 2014. But we were very aware that the pre-sessional is more than just a language course, and that we wanted a course that would engage students with conceptual and academic terms, something that Swain terms as languaging, so thinking for, speaking for thinking and knowledge building and not just language practice. And also discussions by Diane Schmidt at the 2012 Barleap AGM about the differences between IELTS writing and real academic writing tasks. So our aim was to have a preparation programme that really engaged students in the kind of academic participation they would broadly encounter in their academic departments. We had dialogue with the main receiving departments, so School of Management, Economics, but also Geography and Media Arts. And as a result of those discussions, we increased the weighting of the reading and writing task to 65%, because academics in these departments felt that they were the skills most needed by students. And we were informed by the Barleap Can Do framework and the CEFR on what is a B2 level. I think that's probably a discussion for a whole nother presentation. So a lot of work went into thinking about the aims and outcomes before looking at any other components of the programme. in line with that, in thinking through the intellectual journey for the students, I'm just going to talk about a few of these, not all of them, because time is short. But we wanted to ensure greater coherence between the 12, 8 and 4-week programmes. So we did this by demonstrating in our outcomes a greater incremental development of skills. So a 12-week student might have a task of summarising a factual text, 8 weeks summarise and comment on a factual text, 4 weeks summarise and comment on a more complex text. We wanted to be realistic. We felt that our previous aims had been too ambitious, really. A pre-sessional is only the beginning of the academic journeys. It's an ongoing enterprise, so we wanted to foster this view, transmit this view to teachers and learners. There's only so much we can do on a pre-sessional. We wanted our aims to be balanced. We wanted to have an appropriate balance between transferable, intellectual, practical skills in line with the university strategies as well, and other attributes like fostering intercultural awareness. I'll come back to be distinct, indicate level of learning. So on our previous, before we revised the curriculum, an example of a previous aim was you will be able to function as an independent learner. Very ambitious, by the end of 12 weeks. So we wanted to show greater interplay of abilities with 2 or more skills. So we revised this as you will take responsibility as an independent learner or in a group setting. And be distinct. In revising our curriculum, it was a very healthy exercise to do, because what emerged was a greater distinction between the pre-sessional, especially long pre-sessionals like 12-week or in other institutions longer, and a pre-masters. And we actually wanted the pre-master. It helps marketing department as well, doesn't it, to have that distinction. But it helped us to think about that a pre-masters was where students would really develop their research skills or get more into their subject. Our pre-sessional does not go into that depth. So in more explicit assessment of the language skills, very briefly, we did develop our own bespoke listening test. It was came about by looking into research by Field and Reed into EAP listening assessment. I'm not going to say much about it here because a colleague of mine is presenting on the listening test this afternoon, Stuart Wrigley. It's 3:25. Listening in testing time. So if you want to know more about the development of that test and evaluation of it, please go along to that. But the read to write assessment, so a change for us was to give students a closed reading pack. Now, previous years, we had an essay with an indicative reading list. Students were able to go off to the library, source their own materials independently. Got a bit messy. The rationale behind a closed reading pack is that tutors were better able to evaluate use of sources from that reading pack, as well as misuse of sources and acknowledgement of sources. But we do realise that it is a key skill to foster that research. So we allowed students to select one source independently. You always get some that had a few more than one, but... and it also was compatible with our aims of being realistic. Pre-sessional students do have limited time to do quality research. One of, I think, the problems for all of us is how to bridge that gap between students that are going on to different disciplines, have different needs. So we overcame this by developing a general content and a reading pack that was for all students, regardless of what degree programme they were going on to. But the actual assessment topics could be personalised depending on their future subjects. So an example for the oral presentation, audiences love examples. So the oral presentation was to talk about 2 theories in your field of study. So that could be personalised for any student. But it was more difficult for us to overcome the problem of with the writing task. Because we had this lovely idea of the closed reading pack, we wanted a task that would be able, students could personalise according to their degree, but we didn't want to produce a reading pack according to each discipline, one for management, one for media arts, one for geography. So we had chose a general academic theme, social media, and one reading pack. Students could then personalise by choosing one source that was more in line with their field of study. And the question we had was something like, how far do you agree with statement X? Your answer should refer to one of the following: marketing, economics, media arts. So a bit of personalisation there. The other consideration was whether to go for published or bespoke material. So in the past, we'd always produce our own materials in-house of varying qualities. Because we had been less than enamoured with the offerings on the, from publishers. There's any publishers here? But now we are happy with the offerings from publishers. And it's not just because it's more convenient for us, but the rationale behind it was that we did develop our programme aims first before we looked at textbooks. We didn't want one textbook to drive our programme, because what happens if it changes? And also a good teacher's book is a source of learning for tutors that are new to EAP. So we did use some published materials, textbooks, but we also wanted to maintain the bespoke element. So we had our own assessment tasks and supplementary materials developed to support those. And the last consideration was that of a prescriptive curriculum. About 75% of our temporary tutors are new to the centre, maybe new to EAP. So we realised that they would need a lot of support in delivering the curriculum the way we wanted it to be delivered. So we went down a very prescriptive path. We give our tutors tutors' notes, schemes of work. All the materials are pre-written, any bespoke materials. But because we wanted to project a single pedagogical view, and it also makes cover more manageable when you have a prescriptive curriculum. But we do understand the concerns, some of which voiced by McAllister on the Durham pre-sessional, which follows a prescriptive curriculum, that it does micromanage the tutor. There is limited professional autonomy.
We'll maybe come back to that a bit later. So I'm just going to run through the third thing. We've done aims and objectives. We've done sort of content and assessment. And then the final thing was thinking about the practicalities. How can we make this work in a practical kind of structure? And one of the things is that because we had this big increase in temporary tutors, we decided to make a distinction between the roles of permanent staff. Permanent staff are there year-round, they work on our other programmes, they need to take leave during the summer, and they also have other commitments like materials writing for other programmes, so they can't do a full-time teaching load. But we did make use of them in some capacity. The first thing was that we actually shared out line management duties of temporary tutors. So rather than Vicky and I doing all the line management, we shared that amongst other permanent and experienced staff. And we felt that enabled us to give a bit more support to temporary tutors. So the lesson observations and then the feedback afterwards and any problems could be dealt with through line managers. We made unfortunately quite extensive use of our permanent staff for emergency cover. I don't know whether anyone else has this problem on their pre-sessionals, but we seem to have an extraordinary amount of sickness and emergency cover. And again, permanent staff know the university, they know the programme, they're very experienced tutors, and so we felt that they were best placed to sort of be shoved a textbook in your hand, go teach a lesson, last minute cover, perhaps better than a member of staff who's temporary to the university. And then the final one, we introduced a new element which was drop-in consultations. These are in addition to the regular classroom teaching, and they're optional. They can be either academic or pastoral in focus. And the idea is just to provide that extra level of support for any student who feels that they're struggling. And we found that those are particularly useful for any late arrivals. Again, it's a bit of a pre-sessional perennial issue, isn't it? Those students who come in don't get their visas in time. And that gives them a way of just getting a bit of extra support in terms of catching up. And again, we felt that permanent staff were really well placed to do that because they know about the university's other support structures, so they know when to redirect students somewhere else if it's something more serious. They're also very familiar with the programme. And then the practicalities of timetabling. This is something that is probably really obvious, but we weren't doing it before. We introduced a 1-to-1 ratio, which means that if you get 15 new students, you need 1 new tutor. Okay? You don't need to rejig your timetable. You don't need to redistribute marking loads or anything like that. Maybe that's just what everyone else does, but we had this weird system before that didn't happen. Okay? So basically, it meant we could do all our planning in advance. If the student number suddenly increased, 1 extra classroom, 1 extra tutor, problem solved. No kind of last-minute changes to timetabling and things like that. The constraint of that is that you do need to be able to find a tutor and a classroom, which I recognise is not always that easy on a pre-sessional. We also made quite a lot of practical decisions in terms of our assessment design. So we used to have this really nice task where students went and interviewed service staff within the university. We did it at the beginning of the 12-week programme. There were about 30 students. They went off and did their interviews, and then they gave a presentation on their results. And then we had 120 students. And the poor service staff were overwhelmed with 120 students interviewing them. And of course, that's not sustainable when you have a growth in numbers. So we had to sort of get rid of that task, unfortunately, or adapt it. Also marking. Our marking load used to be lower on the old programme. Now if you've got 1 tutor who's responsible for a whole group's essay marking and a whole group's presentation and listening test marking, that's a lot of marking. And we wanted tutors to have enough time to do that marking and to do it well. So we've actually timetabled in marking days. Now, when you timetable in marking days, you have students with nothing to do during those marking days. So we made our presentation task a task that involves quite a lot of independent research. As Vicky said, we reduced independent research for the essay task, but we increased independent research for the presentation task. And rather conveniently, the research happens to fall on the days when the tutors are marking the essays. So we've made this nice intricate sort of timetable where the students have to go off and do their independent research tasks while the tutors are at home. We let them stay at home for a couple of days and blast the essay marking and the written feedback. And the tutors really appreciate that, and the students are still busy doing something useful and productive. And then our final one, which is, I know, very controversial and really against the flow of current what's going on in EAP, but we went low tech. Okay, now the reason for this, we have had the experience before of, firstly, a lot of new temporary tutors who've got to adapt really quickly. They've new programme, new context, a lot of things to learn. And sometimes the technology can just kind of baffle people, but they've got a lot to learn already. And you know, students don't know they're new. Students think they know everything and they know where they are. The other thing, we had the experience that Turnitin had crashed on one of our major essay marking days. Yeah, we have 2 days to mark all the essays and get the formative feedback turned around. Turnitin crashed, was down for a couple of days. On our other programmes, all of our essays are submitted via Turnitin and our feedback is done online and students access it online. On a pre-sessional, the timescale is so tight and the programme needs to run like clockwork, so we've actually gone paper-based with essay submission paper-based and feedback paper-based, again, just for practicality reasons. Again, PC Labs, we used to have lessons scheduled in PC Labs and a lot of sort of cool online stuff. And now we don't have any scheduled lessons in PC Labs because with increased numbers there just aren't enough PC Labs on campus. So tutors are welcome to use students' mobile devices in class or set tasks which students do online at home. But again, in practicality terms, if everything crashes and everything goes wrong and no one can log in, the programme still happens. So it's not that we're anti-tech, but we have just made it non-essential to the running of the programme. So this is our feedback.
Okay, so just some feedback and observations is that the ship didn't sink. We actually accommodated an extra 60 students that just appeared out of nowhere, were sent to us by admissions, and no one noticed. So that's a good test. A high percentage of our students do go on to their main degree programs. Overall feedback was positive about the revised program in 2014 from students and teachers. Teachers and students did say we want more fun and variety of activities, so perhaps that is a bit of a drawback of a highly prescribed curriculum, which is something that, you know, we're thinking about addressing. And in terms of the cognitive challenge, going back to our original aims of it not just being about language practice, but increasing building on knowledge building and extending their awareness and challenging their existing knowledge. We felt that the summative read to write assessment did this quite well. They had input through lectures from guest speakers and the reading pack, and we felt that their existing ideas were challenged and there was a certain amount of knowledge building. In terms of the formative oral tasks, maybe they extended learners linguistically but fell a bit short on the cognitive load. Learners tended to fall within the safe terrain of talking about personal anecdotes, collective experience rather than knowledge building. So it's something for us to consider for the future programme, is how to meet that gap of low-level learners but a higher cognitive load.
So obviously in 2014, thankfully, going back to the ship analogy, it was a bit more like this. I don't want to blow our own trumpets. So certainly there are many sort of issues that we might still face. And for this year, we're sort of prepping up now for the next one, for the 2015 one. We were quite interested in one of my other colleagues attended Steve Kirk's talk at from Durham University at the development PIM, the teacher development PIM in November last year. And Steve talked about task weighting, which is the idea that if you've got a prescriptive curriculum, it's quite useful to indicate the relative importance of various tasks. So you sort of say, this is your main task for this lesson. If nothing else happens, get them to this task, which is kind of an obvious thing. But again, we're trying to think about how we can indicate so that tutors feel that they have flexibility. And that if they feel that their group's not going to cope, okay, fine, I've got to get onto the paragraph writing, and the rest I'll get to as I want, and know that they can cut other things out to give them a bit more autonomy and flexibility. We're not entirely convinced how well the tutors were able to assess students' level of reading through the prescriptive reading pack. We liked the idea. The feeling was that not all the tutors had read the reading pack in a lot of details, and perhaps that even if they had, to understand whether the problem was the reading or the writing through the essay is actually quite a difficult skill to do. So we're going to give it another go this year, but it may be that in future we decide that a separate reading test is necessary. That brings its own problem because that's even more marking and even more tests to write. So I'm not sure quite where we're going to go with that. And as I mentioned before, actually there should be two things here: space and number of tutors. And I don't know if anyone else went to the Glasgow University presentation yesterday, and this really is an issue for us. You know, if the programme gets much bigger, we will not have enough suitable classrooms because there are competing courses. So it may be, those are the two main constraints on this new system, the new structure: space and number of tutors. So it may be that we have to go down a similar route to them in terms of introducing large lectures. Maybe that we go down the online route for online. I don't know, those are the only sort of two things. Any suggestions welcome for dealing with those two things. So really, just to sum up, I know we've just bombarded you with a huge amount of information, but you know, it was a big project and there were a lot of considerations and a lot of them were specific to our context. But in terms of the curriculum, we started with aims and objectives and really spent a lot of time thinking, what can we realistically achieve? We upped our assessment of reading and listening. We did the general stuff through the class content and the subject-specific stuff through the assessment tasks. we made different use of temporary and permanent staff, and we figured out how the timetable would be able to cope with fluctuating numbers. And that's us done. And that's a list of the references that we've included if anyone's interested. And we're very happy to try to answer any questions that you might have. So, yeah, I don't know how long we've got. Have we got time? Yes.
How do you deal with students who fail on your internal assessments? What happens to them?
It depends on the student. Generally, they have to return to their home country. But we refer them to the academic department. So if a student hasn't met, through our internal assessments, hasn't met B2 in each of the 4 individual assessments, there's no discussion. That's it. There is an opportunity to resubmit the essay, but not to redo the other tasks. But if it's a student we had one last year who just overslept on the listening test, and the department felt, and he'd already met B2 level, the department were happy to take him in that case. So it's sort of on a case-by-case basis. Yeah.
How did this development work fit in with workloads?
Because honestly, it was a really bad year that year. It was a real crisis year, and I wrote a report sort of outlining what I thought were the problems and what we needed to do. And thankfully, senior management were really supportive, and they gave us a lot of time to do this project throughout the year.
Yes. We started in January.
We started in January because we had to go through revalidation of the programme, and so there's quite a strict time scale with revalidation and everything. So they basically reduced our normal teaching load during the academic year to allow us to do this, which I realise is a luxury not everyone would have. They were really supportive. Yeah.
With the teachers at a 1-to-1 ratio, the teachers' workload's now higher. They're teaching 21 hours or something like that.
Yes.
And you've mentioned marking, but are you confident they have time to prepare?
That's part of the rationale for having a prescriptive curriculum as well. They said that even though there was a prescriptive curriculum, it does still require a lot of reading through and preparation. Yes, it's still pushed, but I think compared to pre-sessionals that I've taught on previously, a good indicator is that we're just advertising for staff for this year, and we've got a very high number of return applicants this year, which in the previous year no one came back. No one came back. Which shows you. And this year we've already got about 10 who are kind of going, can we come back, can we come back? So that's, for me, that's an indication that they managed to cope. But it's still intensive. I mean, I think pre-sessionals always are.
I think it depends on the entry level of the tutor as well.
Yeah. I mean, actually, one thing we also did, we reduced the essay length. I didn't mention that in the talk, but that was another thing, just to make the essay more manageable for marking load.
If I was to ask, with the reading into writing, was that done in a controlled? Was the writing itself done in a...
No. And again, that's another thing. It was done
extended
at home.
Essay at home.
Yeah, again, I mean, that was something. I went to an event in Bath recently. I recognise a few of your faces from that, and that was something that was discussed, whether writing needs to be done. We do let it happen at home, but how do you deal with plagiarism, etc. Yeah.
Sorry.
We have to finish, do we?
Yeah. Would you care to plug the book that you used in the course?
We used Oxford EAP during the second part of our course, and we used, in the very first block, we used Skillful, which is more language focused. Yes.